Ethan's footsteps echoed softly against the wooden floor of the small apartment. The morning sun filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting long stripes of light across the kitchen counter. It was quiet to quiet as it often was these days, but there was a comforting rhythm in the solitude, a kind of gentle peace he had grown accustomed to. He paused for a moment, taking in the faint smell of coffee lingering from the morning. The apartment was orderly, but not empty. Each item, each book on the shelf seemed to whisper a story of someone who once tried to fill the quiet with laughter and life. But those days felt distant now, like echoes from a time that belonged to someone else. Ethan leaned against the counter, his eyes drifting toward the corner where a small potted plant had begun to lean toward the light. He had always thought that keeping the apartment tidy would make the loneliness easier to bear, but today, even the clean counters and polished windows did little to settle the hollow feeling he carried with him. Every morning, then he noticed her, Emma. She was standing at the far end of the counter, stretching slightly to reach a jar on the top shelf. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the sunlight in a way that made it shine almost like copper. Ethan's chest tightened, and for a moment he froze in place, unsure if he should step forward or remain hidden in the shadowed doorway. She looks like she could use some help, he muttered softly to himself, almost embarrassed by how quickly his heart had skipped a beat. The thought was simple, innocent enough, but there was something about the way she leaned forward, entirely focused on her task, that pulled at him in ways he hadn't expected. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Do you need a hand?" he asked, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. Emma turned at the sound of his voice, eyes widening slightly. A soft laugh escaped her lips, and the warmth in it was enough to make Ethan forget the careful words he had rehearsed in his head. "Actually, yes," she said, her tone light, yet there was a subtle vulnerability beneath it. "I can't reach the jar, and it's heavier than I thought." He reached out, lifting the jar and handing it to her. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting touch, and Ethan felt a spark he didn't quite understand. It was strange, almost frightening. How something as simple as helping someone could feel so significant. "Thank you," Emma said, placing the jar gently on the counter. She looked up at him, her eyes bright, and for a brief moment, the quiet apartment felt less lonely, as if her presence alone had filled the empty spaces he hadn't realized existed. Ethan cleared his throat, trying to steady the flutter in his chest. "I'm glad I was here to help," he said, trying to sound casual. But the truth lingered in his voice. He was glad for any reason to be near her. Emma smiled, a soft, warm smile that seemed to light up the small kitchen. "You always know when to show up, don't you?" she teased lightly, though there was no mockery in her tone, only a genuine appreciation. Ethan laughed softly, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet room. He had always been careful with his words, careful with his emotions. But something about Emma made it difficult to maintain his usual composure. He wanted to stay in this moment, to savor it. Yet a part of him feared that if he lingered too long, the spell might break. As Emma set the jar down, she glanced around the kitchen, noticing how orderly everything was. "You really do keep this place." "Perfect," she said, a note of admiration in her voice. Ethan shrugged lightly. "It helps with the quiet," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers for just a second longer than necessary. He wasn't sure if she would understand what he meant about the quiet, about the empty spaces, but in that brief exchange there was an unspoken connection, a recognition that perhaps they both carried a little loneliness with them. There was a pause, filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Ethan felt a strange, hopeful anticipation. It's the kind that comes when you sense that something unexpected might be about to happen. Something small, perhaps, but meaningful enough to shift the rhythm of your ordinary life. Emma, sensing the quiet moment, tilted her head slightly and smiled. "I guess I'm lucky you were here," she said softly. Ethan nodded, though words failed him for a moment. There was luck, yes, but also something more, a feeling he could not yet name that made him grateful she was in his life, even if just for this fleeting morning. And as they stood there side by side in the sunlit kitchen, The ordinary act of helping someone reach a jar felt suddenly extraordinary. Little did Ethan know, this small moment, this brief encounter in the quiet kitchen, would be the first step in a story that neither of them could have predicted. A story of hope, of connection, of hearts quietly finding one another in the most ordinary of places. Ethan watched as Emma carefully placed the jar on the counter. Her movements precise but gentle. There was something about the way she handled even the smallest objects that reminded him of her, of the moments from their shared past that had lingered quietly in his mind. They had known each other for years, though the closeness they shared now had only begun to surface. It wasn't the kind of friendship that demanded constant attention. It had grown slowly in small, almost unnoticed steps. Ethan remembered their first real conversation years ago at a small community event in the park. Emma had been laughing at a stray dog's clumsy antics, and he had made a joke that had made her smile in that quiet, sunlit way that he had never forgotten. At the time, he had thought it was just a fleeting moment, a passing interaction in the midst of ordinary life. But somehow it had stuck with him. He had carried the memory like a secret warmth in his heart, one he hadn't shared with anyone. And now, standing beside her in the quiet kitchen, that memory came alive again, wrapped in the familiarity of her presence. Emma, too, seemed to carry pieces of the past with her. There were subtle gestures, tiny habits that revealed a long history of unspoken understanding. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the quiet hum she made when concentrating on a taskathon, noticed all of it. And it drew him closer to her in ways he hadn't anticipated. They had shared countless moments that neither had truly acknowledged at the time. Afternoon walks in the park, coffee dates that lingered longer than necessary, an evening spent talking about dreams, fears, and the little absurdities of life. Each interaction had been a thread, slowly weaving together a tapestry of connection that neither of them had been ready to admit until now yet. For all that closeness, there had always been a distance, a gentle hesitation that neither fully understood. Life had a way of keeping them apart at critical moments. College in different cities, jobs that demanded long hours, family obligations. They'd been close enough to care deeply, but far enough that the bond never fully blossomed into what they had both secretly wanted. Ethan remembered one particular evening from 2 years ago. They had stayed late at the local library, working on a community project together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the bookshelves, they had shared a quiet conversation about hopes for the future. Emma had looked at him with an earnest expression, and Ethan had felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something then, something that would have changed everything, but he had held back, afraid of the unknown. And she, in turn, had held back too, afraid of his reaction, afraid of what might come if they admitted the truth. Both of them had carried that unspoken longing, a delicate ache that never fully went away. Now, standing together in the kitchen, it was as if the years of hesitation were slowly dissolving. The past lingered around them, not as a barrier, but as a quiet reminder of what had been waiting all along. Every shared glance, every subtle gesture was a whisper of all the moments they had almost allowed themselves to feel. Ethan picked up a small towel and began to wipe the counter. His movements slow, deliberate. He could feel the weight of all the memories pressing gently against his heart. The time they had spent laughing over small mishaps. The comforting silences during rainy afternoons. The soft words exchanged late at night, all of it came rushing back. Emma caught his gaze and smiled faintly, a wistful expression crossing her features. "Do you remember that day at the park years ago? The one with the dog?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, his lips curving into a small smile. "I do. You laughed so hard I thought you'd never stop." She chuckled lightly. "I remember thinking that you were different, not like everyone else, that you actually noticed the little things." He felt a warmth spread through him. "I guess some things never change," he said quietly. "I've always noticed you, Emma, even when I didn't say anything." Her eyes softened, and for a moment the kitchen felt suspended in time. It wasn't just a room anymore, it was a space where the past and present converged, where every unspoken word, every restrained feeling, seemed to hover in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. They stood there together, aware of the invisible threads that had drawn them closer over the years. It was a connection built on trust, laughter, and quiet understanding, a bond that had survived distance and circumstance. And yet, there was still that lingering hesitation, that unspoken question: would they finally allow themselves to acknowledge the depth of what they felt? Or would life continue to place gentle obstacles in their way, keeping them from the closeness they both crave? The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, turning the room golden. Ethan was arranging the ingredients for a simple dinner when the doorbell rang. He furrowed his brow. He hadn't expected anyone. He opened the door to find Emma standing there, slightly out of breath, holding a small, worn-out cookbook in her hands. "Hey," she said, her cheeks flushed from the brisk walk. "I was passing by and thought, maybe you could use a hand with dinner." Ethan's chest tightened, a familiar warmth spreading through him. "Of course," he said, stepping aside. "Come in. I was just starting." It was a coincidence, or perhaps something closer to fate, that Emma had shown up at this exact moment. The mundane act of helping each other in the kitchen had become a subtle rhythm in their lives. Yet this time, it felt different. There was a current of anticipation in the air, quiet electricity neither could ignore. As Emma set down the cookbook, Ethan noticed a small smudge of flour on her hand. Without thinking, he reached out, gently wiping it away. Their fingers brushed, lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Neither spoke immediately. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the soft hum of the refrigerator and the golden glow of the sun on their faces. They began cooking together. But it wasn't the routine of preparing a meal that mattered. It was the unspoken closeness that came with it. Every movement, every glance felt imbued with meaning. Ethan stirred the sauce while Emma chopped vegetables. Yet their eyes kept finding one another. A smile here, a quiet laugh there. Small touches, tiny gestures. Carrying the weight of all the feelings they had tucked away for years, Ethan tried to focus on the recipe. But he found his mind drifting to the past, to the moments that had brought them here. The long walks, the shared laughter, the comforting silences. They were not just memories anymore. They were alive, present in the gentle way Emma brushed against his arm, or in the subtle softness of her smile. Emma paused, looking down at the vegetables she was chopping. "Do you ever think about how strange it is," she said softly, "that we keep finding ways to cross paths, even when life tries to pull us apart?" Ethan nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I've thought about it more times than I can count. Sometimes it feels like we were meant to find each other again, no matter what." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of nostalgia and hope. "I've always appreciated how steady you've been. Even when I didn't realize it, you were there." His heart ached at the words, a mixture of joy and longing. "I've always noticed you too, Emma, more than I probably should have." There was a pause, heavy with meaning, as if both were holding their breath. The air between them was charged, not with anything inappropriate, but with an intensity that came from years of unspoken feelings finally finding a moment to surface. A sudden knock on the counter startled them. Mama had accidentally bumped it while reaching for a spoon. They laughed together, the sound breaking the tension but not the connection. Ethan felt an unfamiliar courage welling up inside him, a desire to speak what had lingered silently for so long. "Emma," he began, his voice steady but soft, "I don't want to waste another moment pretending we don't feel this. Whatever it is between us." She paused, knife in hand, meeting his gaze. Her lips curved into a faint, nervous smile. "I was afraid you felt the same," she admitted. "I didn't want to say it because I didn't want to risk losing this." She gestured vaguely between them, to the kitchen, to the moment, to the fragile thread of connection they had spent years nurturing. Ethan set down the spoon he had been holding and stepped a little closer. "I've been holding back too, but I don't think we need to anymore." They continued cooking, but now each glance, each shared smile, carried a new depth. It was as if a door had opened, allowing them to step into a space they had only dreamed about before. The present moment, simple, ordinary, yet charged with meaning, felt like a turning point as they placed the meal on the table. A sudden rain shower tapped against the window. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost like a quiet applause from the world outside, celebrating the moment they had created together. Ethan poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to Emma, their fingers brushing again. They sat side by side, savoring the meal and the rare, beautiful silence that accompanied it. It wasn't about what they were eating or even the act of sharing dinner. It was about being together, fully present, finally allowing the connection they had carried for so long to exist without fear or hesitation. Emma reached over, placing her hand lightly on his for just a second, and Ethan felt a surge of warmth, a quiet certainty that this was exactly where they were meant to be. The kitchen, once just a simple space in the apartment, had transformed into something more. It was a place of second chances, of rediscovered hope, of a bond that had survived years of distance, hesitation, and unspoken feelings. And as the rain continued to fall outside, Ethan realized that this small twist of fate, Emma showing up at the perfect moment, had reignited a spark that neither of them could ignore. The past had led them here, but the present had opened the door to something far more promising, a chance to finally explore what had always been waiting quietly between them. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something that went beyond simple longing or nostalgia. It was hope. It was possibility. And it was beautiful. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, his fingers tracing the edge absent-mindedly as he watched Emma move around the room. There was a gentle grace in her every step, a quiet rhythm he had come to notice over the years. Yet today, even as they shared the same space, there was an invisible distance between them, a barrier made of words they had never spoken. For so long, both had felt the pull toward each other, the silent awareness of a bond that was deeper than friendship. Yet neither had dared to acknowledge it aloud. Now, with the sunlight fading and casting soft shadows across the room, the tension of all those unspoken feelings settled quietly around them. Emma paused by the counter, holding a cup of tea. She glanced at Ethan, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the late afternoon. "Do you ever wonder," she began softly, "what would have happened if we had said something sooner?" Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to reach out, to speak the words he had carried for years, but his throat felt tight. Instead, he let out a quiet sigh and shook his head slowly. "I think about it more often than I probably should," he admitted. "There were so many moments, times when I wanted to say something, but I didn't. I was afraid, maybe afraid of changing what we already had." Emma's fingers tightened around her cup. "I know exactly what you mean," she said. "I've held back too. I thought it was safer to stay quiet than to risk everything." Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the vulnerability she tried to hide. For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint rustle of the wind outside were the only sounds in the room. And yet, within the quiet, there was a profound intimacy and unspoken understanding that transcended words. Ethan finally took a slow step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think maybe we've been too cautious," he said quietly. "We've let fear guide us, instead of acknowledging what's been there all along." Emma's gaze softened, a mixture of relief and longing shining in her eyes. "I've wanted to say it, Ethan. I've wanted to tell you how much you matter to me," she whispered, her voice barely above the hum of the kitchen lights. The weight of her words pressed gently against his chest, filling the space between them with something fragile yet undeniable. Ethan's hand hovered for a moment, unsure whether to reach for hers. Every instinct told him to, yet the hesitation lingered, a reflection of years of unspoken feelings. "I've felt the same," he admitted, his voice steady now, though his heart raced. "For so long I've wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to ruin what we had or lose you." Emma set her cup down and took a careful step closer, her expression open and vulnerable. "You couldn't have ruined anything, Ethan," she said softly. "We've been building this connection quietly over all these years. Maybe it just needed time to find its own voice. A soft smile crossed his face. I guess we're finally listening to it, he said, a hint of humor in his tone, though the emotion beneath it was real and raw. They stood there, side by side, the years of hesitation melting slowly into something lighter, something hopeful. The unspoken truth once a weight on their hearts now hovered in the air like a fragile promise waiting to be acknowledged. Emma looked down for a moment, then back at him. It's strange, isn't it? She said. How we can be so close and yet so far apart. Ethan nodded, understanding completely. Life has a way of keeping us on the edges of things sometimes. But maybe the important part is that we're here now, and we can finally stop holding back. The quiet of the room seemed to embrace them, offering a safe space for the vulnerability that had been tucked away for so long. They didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Just the simple truth of their feelings, shared in a moment of quiet honesty, was enough. Ethan extended his hand slowly, giving her the choice to take it. Emma's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile, and she placed her hand lightly in his. The contact was gentle, tentative, yet filled with meaning. It was a simple gesture, but in it lay years of longing, hope, and restrained emotion. For a moment, night. The evening air was cool, and a soft breeze drifted in through the open window. Carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier in the day, Ethan and Emma sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the last remnants of their simple dinner pushed to the side. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was loaded with unspoken truths, memories, and emotions that had been carefully held at bay for far too long. Ethan could feel it. The weight of all the years they had spent dancing around their feelings, afraid to speak too loudly, afraid to risk what they already cherished. And yet, he sensed that something had shifted tonight. The air seemed different, almost electric, as if the universe had paused, giving them this moment to finally confront what had been simmering quietly for years. Emma reached for her cup of tea, her fingers brushing against his briefly as she set it down. The contact sent a ripple through him, a reminder of everything that had been left unsaid. Ethan, she began softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to keep holding back anymore. He leaned forward slightly, his heart hammering in his chest. Emma, me neither, he admitted. There's so much I've wanted to say for years, but I kept thinking, maybe it wasn't the right time, or maybe you didn't feel the same. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. I've always felt it, Ethan, she confessed. Even when I tried to ignore it, even when I told myself it wasn't practical or safe to feel this way, I couldn't stop thinking about you. Ethan felt a surge of emotion he could no longer contain. The careful restraint he had maintained for so long shattered in that instant. Emma, he said, his voice catching slightly. I feel the same. More than I've ever been able to say. Every time we laughed, every time we spent hours talking or just being near each other, I felt it. I just didn't know how to tell you without risking everything we already had. She leaned back slightly, blinking rapidly to steady her emotions. You don't know how long I've waited to hear you say that, she admitted. It's been there the whole time, Ethan. This feeling. It's never gone. The kitchen was quiet again, but this time it wasn't filled with hesitation. It was heavy with recognition, understanding, and the fragile yet undeniable joy of truth finally spoken. Ethan reached across the table, resting his hand gently over hers. The touch was soft, deliberate, full of meaning, and yet it carried the promise of something much larger, of a bond that had endured time, distance, and fear. I was so scared of losing you, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Scared that if I spoke too loudly, it would break the delicate balance we had. But now I realize the balance was never in danger. What we feel, it's bigger than any fear. Emma's smile was small but radiant, a mixture of relief and warmth. I was scared too, she admitted. I thought if I said anything, it might ruin the friendship, or worse, leave me empty if you didn't feel the same. But knowing that you do, It feels like everything I've waited for has finally caught up with me. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. Emma, I don't want to waste another day pretending we're just friends when there's so much more between us. I want us to be honest with each other completely, starting now. She nodded, her own hand pressing lightly against his. I want that too, she said. I don't care about the past mistakes, the missed chances. All I want is you honestly, openly, without holding back anymore. A soft, tentative laugh escaped him. It feels like a relief, finally saying it out loud, he admitted. Like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying has been lifted. Emma leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting his with quiet intensity. It's strange, she said, how something so simple, just saying what's in your heart, can feel so monumental. But it is. It's everything. Ethan felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a quiet joy mingled with a gentle awe. For so long, he had imagined this moment in his mind, the moment when the truth would finally be acknowledged. But now that it was here, it was even more beautiful than he had dared to hope. Emma, he said softly, I can't promise that life will be easy. There will still be challenges, things we can't control. But I can promise you this. I will always be honest with you, and I will always try to be here for you. Through everything. Her hand tightened around his slightly, and she nodded, a small tear glistening in the corner of her eye. And I will do the same, she said, her voice steady but emotional. I promise. For the first time in years, the tension, the hesitation, and the quiet longing between them dissolved. What had been held back, restrained by fear and uncertainty, was now free. They didn't need words to fill every silence their emotions, spoken and unspoken. Spoke volumes. They sat together in the soft glow of the kitchen light, hands intertwined, hearts quietly acknowledging what had always been there. It wasn't dramatic or flamboyant. It was honest, patient, and deeply heartfelt. The turning point had arrived not through grand gestures, but through courage, truth, and the willingness to finally speak from the heart. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, the city continuing its rhythm beyond the window. But inside that small kitchen, time felt suspended. Ethan and Emma had crossed the threshold from unspoken longing to acknowledged truth, and in that quiet golden space, they both realized that life had finally given them the chance they had waited 4 years of patience, reflection, and unexpressed emotion, now blossoming into something tangible, real, and beautifully theirs. And in that moment, everything changed. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, warm and gentle, casting a soft glow over the small apartment. Ethan was already awake, quietly preparing coffee, the familiar rhythm of the morning comfortingly normal. Yet today, there was a different kind of light in the room, one that seemed to reflect the quiet. Joy settling in his heart. Emma appeared in the doorway, her hair slightly tousled from sleep, a soft smile playing on her lips. When she saw Ethan, her eyes lit up in a way that made him forget every other thought. He returned her smile, feeling the simple, profound happiness of being in her presence. Good morning, she said, her voice carrying a warmth that made the small room feel even cozier. Good morning, he replied, handing her a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed for the briefest moment, a gentle, familiar spark passing between them. Neither spoke, for there was no need. The comfort and understanding in that quiet gesture said everything they had been waiting to express. They sat together at the small table, sipping their coffee and enjoying the simple pleasure of being side by side. The air was filled with the soft sounds of the city waking up outside, but inside time seemed to slow. Every glance, every small smile carried the weight of years of longing and unspoken feelings now finally acknowledged. Ethan placed his cup down and reached for Emma's hand. I was thinking, he began softly, about everything that's led us here. All the missed chances, all the quiet moments we shared without realizing what they meant. And now it feels like it all makes sense. Every step, every little thing brought us to this exact moment. Emma nodded, her eyes shimmering with emotion. It does, she said. I think I've spent so long wondering if we'd ever reach this point. And now that we have, it feels like the world is finally in the right place, if only for us." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, simply holding hands and watching the sunlight spill across the counter. There was no rush, no need to fill the air with words. The bond they had nurtured over the years through hesitation, longing, and quiet understanding was now secure, steady, and beautifully alive. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "I don't know what the future will hold," he said quietly. "There will still be challenges, moments of doubt or worry. But I do know this. We'll face it together, honestly and openly. That's what matters most." Emma's smile deepened. "I've been afraid of so many things," she admitted. "Afraid that our feelings might not last or that life would pull us apart again. But now I feel like I can trust us. I trust that we'll find our way no matter what." They laughed softly, a shared sound that was lighter than any tension they had carried before. It was a laugh of relief, of joy, and of quiet gratitude. For the first time in a long while, they allowed themselves to fully embrace the happiness they had longed for, without guilt, fear, or hesitation. Ethan stood and moved closer to Emma, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I never want to take this for granted," he said gently. "Every moment with you feels like a gift." Emma reached up, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "And I'll never take it for granted either," she replied. "I've learned that the best things in life are often the ones you wait for, quietly, patiently. And then suddenly, they're here." They lingered in that moment, simply enjoying each other's presence, letting the connection that had been years in the making settle fully into reality. There was a sense of completion, not dramatic or theatrical, but natural and true. They had crossed the threshold from longing and hesitation to trust, openness, and mutual understanding. As the morning light grew brighter, Ethan and Emma moved to open the windows, letting the fresh air in. The world outside continued its rhythm. Yet inside their small kitchen, everything felt exactly as it should. There was laughter, soft conversation, and a quiet joy that no circumstance could diminish. Ethan reached for a small notebook he had tucked away on the counter and opened it. "I started writing thing.